Thank you for joining me today. I hope you and your families are well and that you are managing during what is such a difficult time for all of us. I will be reading two pieces that were written by students of the University of Rochester who were fortunate to speak firsthand of the tremendous impact of Susan B. Anthony and the decision to admit women to our campus community. As is well known, Susan B. Anthony worked for many reforms, including abolition and labor reform. The focus of my readings today are on her efforts on educational reform. My thanks especially to the University of Rochester Library and Melissa Mead for sharing these documents with me. Before we begin, I'd like to mention a few notable facts about Miss Anthony. As most of us know, she spent her adult years in Rochester, and her home, which is now a museum on Madison Street, is less than 3 miles from campus. This year we celebrated two great anniversaries related to Susan B. Anthony. Her 200th birthday was commemorated in February, and this year is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which granted the right to vote to all U.S. women over the age of 21. If you visit the museum website, you will see a quote which inspired my reading today. Quote, "This is the home of one of the world's greatest revolutionaries," unquote. First, I will read excerpts from a letter from Vera Twitchell, class of 1904. Secondly, I will read from the first volume of the Women's Yearbook in 1909 called Croesus, which is dedicated to Miss Anthony. This letter is dated March 12, 1960. Dear Mrs. Kraus, so you are trying to find out about the first 10 years of coeducation in the dear old U of R. Well, I can only tell you about the first 4 years. There are not very many of us left who on that first day in September 1900 went through those doors of Anderson Hall. There were 16 of us who entered then and went through the 4 years to graduate on June 15, 1904. There were other girls who came in after a year or more at some other college to finish at the U of R, and a few more who came in but did not finish the 4 years. As to how we were welcomed, there is only one sentence to express it. We were not wanted. It will be very hard for any of the women and girls now to realize the prejudice of higher education for girls at that time. The most common cause of argument then was, why should girls go to college? Oh, of course the 4 Eastern colleges for women were giving higher education to girls, but the great middle class was considered a high school education plenty for any girl. Why, all they did was marry and have children. So if they knew how to cook and clean and take care of babies, what else did they ever need to know? Fortunately, in my case, my mother taught me how to cook and clean and sew beginning when I was 12. And my father, who was a lawyer and later a judge of the lower court, said he regretted that he was not able to send me to college. So when the women of Rochester began to try to raise the large sum which the trustees of the U of R asked before girls could be admitted, he at once said that if they succeeded, I could go. So after my graduation from what was then called the Rochester Free Academy in June of 1900, I watched anxiously for the outcome. I wish I could make you girls and women of today realize what going to college meant to me and to many other girls also. To actually go to college and really graduate and wear a cap and gown. The very thought of it made every nerve in my body tingle. But then it would come over me that it was only a fairy tale. It could not really happen to me. When a few weeks before the deadline, the papers told how far behind the fund was, then my hopes died, and about the first week in September, I registered at a business school in town. After a week at that school, that Friday evening when my father came home with the evening papers, I shall never forget his call to me to see the headlines, which said that dear blessed Susan B. at the meeting of the trustees had pledged her life insurance to make up the last $1,000. My father said to me, Monday morning, you go and register at the college. But remember, all the freshmen had expected to attend a men's college. Even the new president had expected to be the head of a men's college. Now girls, yes girls, could be there too. And we were there. After registering, I, as well as others, had to take a math exam. Luckily for me, that was my easiest subject. I shall never forget the kindness of dear old Professor Baker, who showed me that day. The exam was not too hard, but I was rather excited about it, and in one problem of reducing to its lowest terms, I stopped once too soon. As I took my paper up to his desk, and he said to wait while he looked it over, I felt quite confident about it, until he put a pencil mark beside one problem, then smiled at me, and pointing with his pencil at it, he said, I think you can do a little better with that one. One look showed me my mistake, but he handed me the pencil and I quickly reduced it to its lowest terms and handed it back to him. Again he smiled and marked the paper correct. That was the only subject all through my college course in which I never had to take another exam. Not so with any other subjects, though. I surely had to work hard all 4 years, especially in both ancient and modern languages. How did the boys treat us? Just as impolitely as they knew how. As I lived in the northwest part of the city, I took a streetcar to the center of town and transferred to another line, which ran up East Main, and got off at Prince Street and walked to the gate of the campus along the walk to Anderson Hall. One morning, as I came along the walk, I saw a large group of men on the steps. When they saw me coming, they quickly closed ranks, close together on both of the lower steps, leaving no space at all where I could go up. They were talking and looking up over my head as I reached the steps. Very politely, I asked, may I get through? They did not even look at me. A second and a third time I asked, each one a little more decided in tone, but with no results. So putting my book under one arm, I turned a bit, and with all the strength I could give, my elbow went into the boy nearest to me, followed quickly with another strong jab, and the third and hardest of all caused him to give way, and I walked up the steps. Of course, as we went from class to class, they always rushed ahead of us and slammed the door of the classroom in our faces. Going upstairs, they pushed and shoved us aside, running up ahead. We were given a room on the lower front corner of Anderson Hall for our room. In it was a bare table and some straight chairs. Later, we managed to get a rug and some draperies. At the end of the hall, a curtain enclosed a place where we could hang our coats and hats. As we went upstairs to chapel each day, the boys always got in ahead of us, so we sat in the back corner nearest the door. One day, as we were going up the stairs, one of the girls said, I do not see any use in our going to chapel. The president always prays that we become men of fine Christian character, and you know we just can't do that. Our first social affair was a Halloween party at the home of one of the other girls who had come to finish her college work at the U of R. It was a masquerade party, and we all were dressed and masked, so it was hard to know who was who. As I started up the stairs where we were to take off our outer coats, there was a tall person ahead of me with a loose costume coming down to the floor, and with a hood and a mask on the head. At about the third step up the stairs, I happened to notice the feet of the person ahead of me, and they were decidedly men's feet in men's shoes. I quickly gave the alarm, both to those in the downstairs hall and those at the top of the stairs. The boy turned, pushed me aside, and ran down, but with several most indignant girls both below and above him, he had a hard time getting out the door. His loose costume was partly torn off, and the back of the hood pulled off, showing the back of his hair, but he did manage to keep us from seeing his face. So we were never quite sure as to whom he was, but several of the boys were under suspicion for some time. Most of the professors were kind and considerate of us. Most of us were fond of Professor Gilmore, although he was very outspoken and frank in his comments. I remember once as he said to me while holding in his hand a paper I had written, "When you recite in class, you do a pretty good job, but when you write a paper, you make an awful mess of it." In Professor Forbes' class, he always put our card, after he had called on us, at the bottom of the pack. As he never shuffled them, we had a pretty good idea that we would not be called upon to recite for a few days, and we generally took advantage of that. One time he had a cold and was bothered with a cough for several days. Then one day I noticed he did not cough, and I was surprised at his getting over it so quickly. Then, to my amazement, the card of the one who had just been called upon, instead of his usual place for it at the bottom of the pack, he put it in the middle. That evening, my mother remarked that she had read in the paper that Dr. Forbes' twin brother from Florida was visiting him. I asked about his twin and was told, yes, very few could tell them apart, and how they did used to fool the girls when they were young. The girls they later married said that when the boys were calling on them, they often fooled them. I also found out that they both taught the same subjects. Of course, that got me to thinking. And the next morning, as I was standing on the corner of State Street, waiting for the streetcar going up East Main, one of the boys stopped there for the car also. At that point, many of them would speak politely to us when we met. Just before our streetcar came, Dr. Forbes went by, walking west on Main Street. We both spoke to him, and he answered us politely. Later, as we were walking across the campus, coming from the other direction, was Professor Forbes. The boy turned to me and said, "We just saw him going down towards Main Street. How could he get up here now?" Then, of course, I had to tell him about the twin brothers. Of course, it spread through the class, but we were all surprised that the professor from the South could go on with the subject his brother was teaching, with practically no change at all. It was only a day or two longer before our own teacher returned, still with a light cough, and, to our relief, putting the cards each time on the bottom of the pack, and we could not help letting him know that we had found out about his brother and welcomed him back. In all the 4 years, only about half of the male members of the class of 2004 did begin to treat us politely. Then the committee for graduation sent us word that all in the class would be taxed, and I cannot remember how much. We were indignant because none of us were on the committee, so we sent back the message, "We do not believe in taxation without representation." So they put 2 girls on the committee. At least we were represented. But at the class day exercises, there were no seats reserved for us. We had to sit with the audience. But then Prexy, or someone in authority, insisted that there should be seats for us on graduation day. I am rather sorry that high schools now have their graduates wear caps and gowns. It takes away from the meaning that those caps and gowns meant to college graduates in former days. My mother had my gown made and bought the cap instead of renting it, as she knew I would wish to keep them, and I still have them, carefully put away, although there are a few moth holes in the gown. It still means a great deal to me, and I am sure it does to my 3 sons. And I hope it will mean something to my grandsons and daughters. I am sorry to be so late with this, but life is in very slow motion for me, as I am quite crippled with arthritis, and it takes most of my time to do what is necessary to care for myself and my home. Also, my grandchildren who live in New Jersey like to come up here to slide and play in the snow. And 2 weeks ago, just as I started to write this, one of the children came down with the mumps, and so for 10 days I had 3 youngsters here to care for. I was very glad to do it, but there was no time or strength left to do any writing. I hope you may be able to pick out a few things from this rather long discourse to add to what happened to all the girls who started what is now such a fine coeducational college. Sincerely yours, Vera Twitchell. Next, I have a reading from the Croesus, published in 1909 by the women of the junior class of the University of Rochester. Forward. In all sincerity, in all simplicity, in a spirit of hopefulness and goodwill, we present to you this, our book. Preface. We, the women of the class of 1910, offer this first issue of the Croesus to the public, hoping that they will be tolerant of its many defects and shortcomings. It has been our hope and aim to make our book as truly representative and of as high an order as any annual issued by a separate women's college. The difficulty of the undertaking can easily be seen by a comparison of the number of women at this university with those in the various women's colleges. Our small numbers, together with the absence of any dormitory life, have presented almost insurmountable obstacles to the realization of our ideal. To the memory of Susan B. Anthony, as a token of the love, appreciation, and gratitude of the women of the University of Rochester, this book is respectfully dedicated. Ms. Susan B. Anthony's work in behalf of coeducation. For 50 years, the University of Rochester had been an institution whose sole aim was the education of men. But during that half-century, a strong sentiment in favor of the higher education of women had been spreading throughout the land. In the West, great state universities were growing up, which were planned on a coeducational basis. While in the East, the older and more conservative colleges, one after another, were reluctantly opening their doors to women. It was in the early 90s that the question of coeducation first began to be agitated in Rochester. For years, Susan B. Anthony had desired that young women should be allowed an equal share in the educational advantages afforded by this university. And furthermore, as college education for girls became more popular, a feeling grew up among the citizens of Rochester that, with a well-equipped college in their city, they should be able to educate their daughters as well as their sons. In 1891, the first conference with regard to the matter was held. The trustees of the university decided, however, that the scheme was quite impractical on account of the lack of funds to meet the increased expense which the admission of women would entail. But the matter continued to be agitated, and in 1898, the trustees of the university agreed to make the institution coeducational, provided the women of Rochester would raise $100,000 to be added to the endowment of the university within a year. At the year's end, the stupendous task was far from being accomplished, though considerable progress had been made. Yielding to the pressure of public opinion, the trustees extended the time for another year and reduced the sum demanded to $50,000. Miss Anthony, fully occupied with the strenuous duties of her calling, left the actual collection of the fund to others, and was quite appalled to hear on Friday, September 7th, 1900, from the secretary of the fund committee that there was still lacking $8,000 to complete the required amount, and that the time expired the next day. The burden of the enterprise which she had inaugurated was to fall upon her shoulders after all. Yet she was equal to the emergency. She spent a sleepless night, but by mid-afternoon of the next day, she had succeeded in securing additional pledges for $6,000. The day was waning, however. The board was in session and was liable to adjourn at any time, and the cause would be lost. Finally, at the last crucial moment, her indomitable perseverance conquered. The last $2,000 was pledged by an aged and wealthy citizen of Rochester, and Miss Anthony proceeded in triumph to the place where the trustees were in session. But her triumph was short-lived. The pledges were duly examined and approved, with the exception of that for the last $2,000, which was declared invalid owing to the age and precarious health of the donor. Miss Anthony was stunned. Should the battle be lost and on a technicality? Never. She had not wished the cause of coeducation to suffer from any connection with her name, she told the gentleman, and then added firmly, I now pledge my life insurance for the $2,000. The deed was done, the task accomplished, and in the language of the press, the doors of the University of Rochester were opened to women. That they had been opened by the women for the women might, with equal propriety, have been added. And what would it have meant if Miss Anthony had not been moved to complete the work that she had begun and to fling herself into the breach at the critical moment? Simply this, that the consummation of the cause of coeducation would have been indefinitely postponed, and the girls of Rochester, for the future, at the price perhaps of much expense and sacrifice, would have had to seek their college training elsewhere, or never have been able, many of them, to attain it at all. The trustees, owing to the apathy of the wealthy citizens of Rochester and the growing hostility of the alumni, were by no means ready to make any further concessions to the women of the city, their petitioners. And it is highly probable that, if the funds had not been forthcoming on that September afternoon, the doors of the University of Rochester would have remained permanently closed to women. Whatever then may be our convictions concerning the cause to which Miss Anthony devoted her life, to her memory we must pay ungrudgingly the full tribute of respect and honor. As a result of her self-sacrificing struggle, we, the women of the 20th century, are enjoying the heritage of higher education which was denied those of her own generation. Thank you again so much for joining us today. I hope you stay safe and well, and I wish you all the very best for the end of the semester and for the days ahead. Looking forward to seeing you back on campus very soon.